The movement and formation of the Mongol army were determined by two factors that set them clearly apart from the armies of every other traditional civilization. First, the Mongol military consisted entirely of cavalry, armed riders without a marching infantry. The second unique characteristic of the Mongol army was that it traveled without a commissary or cumbersome supply train other than its large reserve of horses that always accompanied the soldiers. As they moved, they milked the animals, slaughtered them for food, and fed themselves from hunting and looting. Marco Polo alleged that the Mongol warriors could travel 10 days without stopping to make a fire or heat food, that they drank horses' blood, and that each man carried with him 10 pounds of dried milk paste, putting 1 pound of it in a leather flask of water each day to make his meal. Compared to the Jurched soldiers, the Mongols were much healthier and stronger. The Mongols consumed a steady diet of meat, milk, yogurt, and other dairy products, and they fought men who lived on gruel made from various grains. The grain diet of the peasant warriors stunted their bones, rotted their teeth, and left them weak and prone to disease. Unquote. So, in your estimation, like how much did the superior mobility and nutrition of the Mongol army play into their martial dominance?
I think there are factors, but any factor like that that you can look at, their ability on horseback, the ability to fire bows and arrows while attacking and while retreating, and their diet, all of these are factors, but all of these factors were there before Genghis Khan. I
Mm,
mean, and so it was his ability to put it all together and to be able to think in a much larger way than anyone else had done.
mm,
So I think the diet is an important issue because it allowed them to be mobile. You can imagine if you're accustomed to eating, whether it's bread or rice or any other kind, you got to take all that stuff with you. You're going to have carts back there bringing all this stuff to cook and eat.
mm,
Well, if you're living off of the animals that you hunt and the animals that you herd, and you drink a horse milk and you eat the dried curd from cows or from sheep, then that gives you a kind of mobility that no one else has. It also gives you a supply of food all the time. You're not depending on harvest and if the rain didn't come and so on. Rain doesn't come, okay, you move your animals to a place where the rain came. So it's just one factor. I'm not trying to attribute the
mhm,
diet to the success of the Mongols, but I think it is important to consider that. But it was also the diet of many other steppe tribes.
mm,
And of course, all the steppe tribes in general have been extremely successful. Whether you look at the Huns, who
mhm,
came out of Mongolia, the Turks, who came out of Mongolia, or the Mongols, who came out of Mongolia, they were
mm,
all extremely successful. Then they settled down and they all tended to start weakening. But
mm. And the mobility factor, I mean, not only did this give them great speed, um, they also did things that I recall in your book. They would like, I think, tie branches to horse back so they would kick up dust as they move. They're constantly using these techniques to kind of stay in motion, but also obfuscate their motions. Basically never allowing the enemy to establish a pattern recognition on them, right? It's making it's hard to fight what you
yes,
can't
yes, yes.
see and can't track. And you mentioned this sort of unique where armies tended to attack only while they advanced, and then when they would go into retreat, they would just retreat. But the Mongols would often move, they would attack in their advance and then also attack and retreat. And so could you say a little bit about that? Like how this um superior dynamism, I guess, sort of
Yes,
served the military efforts of Genghis?
yes. We had mentioned before the civilizations tend to have a certain pattern of how they fight. So one of the things is the great armies would move, whether it's the army of Alexander the Great or anyone else that you can think of, is they would move along the paths that had been used by merchants and other armies for years. They would follow the route.
Hmm.
Well, Genghis Khan did not do that.
Hmm.
He would come from some direction that no one ever expected.
Hmm.
He would, in the case of Bukhara, that you mentioned before, he would cross the desert and attack them from where no one had ever attacked from the desert. They always came along the same routes.
Hmm.
Every army would follow the same. No, he came that way. So he was always trying to do things in a different way.
Hmm.
And I think that this had a tremendous impact. This ability to think, to attack in new ways,
Hmm.
that was a key part of his success.
And always exploiting the element of surprise.
Yes,
Um, it what so but you mentioned this earlier, like that these abilities preceded his armies, so like the ability to fire bows from horseback, for instance.
yes,
Why
yes.
were other groups not like I mean, I guess we're back to the same question, like what makes him unique in this respect? Is it just
Mhm.
he almost trying to do things differently? Is that what's he's just always pushing the
He,
envelope?
yes, he certainly wanted to try it, but I think part of that, growing up on his own, so to speak, or the
Okay.
small family,
Yeah.
they had, for example, when he was a small child, uh, and they wanted to catch fish. Mongols don't usually eat fish, but he wanted to catch fish. So he took the sewing needle that his mother had, made a hook in order to catch fish. So it was very innovative in the way that he was able to think.
Mm.
And so growing up in this way, it's then he's more than capable of thinking, okay, we'll let some of the soldiers go along the route. And that way the enemy will hear they're coming. They will know about it. They will, the
Mm.
people
Mhm.
be fleeing ahead of him. I'll find. And then we're just going to go across the desert because he's used to crossing areas that nobody's crossed before anyway.
Mhm.
And he's more than willing to do it. And so it was that ability, I think that it really did help him to think in new ways. And uh, otherwise, he was using almost every time you can see some precedent before him, even like to tie branches on the tail of the horse and that obscures the path, or the way the Mongols would attack, and they used sort of just relied upon the vanity of the enemy often.
Mm.
So the Mongols would time and again, they would come attack, 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 and then the enemy be firing their arrows, and the Mongols would be firing theirs. And then the Mongols would sort of act scared, and they would turn and they'd run away, still firing. They would run away. And then as they ran away, they would start dropping some of the loot that they had gathered along the way, some of the riches. And so
Mm.
then the victorious army would come rushing out of the city. And then, of course, the men immediately they didn't want to chase the Mongol. They want to go chase after this article that had been dropped and see what it is. They get all disorganized. Meanwhile, the Mongols just pull back behind the hill where the rest of the army is located. They regroup and they come in and they conquer. And it was amazing that this system worked over and over and over. It seems like the armies that were being attacked, they couldn't resist that urge to think, yes, we've won, and to go after the Mongols. And the Mongols, there was no shame in running away. There was no shame at all,
Yeah.
especially if you knew you were going to use that to come back again. And this is why he said he never lost a battle. He never lost a battle.
That's so fascinating that you almost are like baiting your opponent to break ranks
Yes,
and
exactly.
just once that happens, then they are disorganized. You can fall back, reorganize, and then exploit that disorganization. Um,
Yes,
and yeah, instead of being, it's what is he doing? He's dropping all of, as you said, you're exploiting their greed, I guess, in a way. But you're also dropping all pride, right? It doesn't matter if you retreat. Like the only thing that
yes,
matters is victory.
exactly,
And
exactly.
so, yeah, if you need to look bad for a minute or act scared or whatever the thing is, it's just all a means to an end.
Yes. The Mongols didn't engage in any of that bravado of racing out and around and showing off and a lot of things
Mhm.
that, like European knights would show off all this kind of stuff. And Mongols weren't like that. No, they were there to win. That was it. They were
Hmm.
there to win. And there was no individual glory. Another thing about them, there was no glory in dying.
Hmm.
It was in fighting and living And if one of they were organized into squads of 10. And if one of the people in your squad was killed, you had to bring him back.
Mm.
Don't come back without him. You bring them back, you stick together, you're a group. You're always a group. That's it. But there were no memorials made to the people who died. The name wasn't even mentioned for usually about 2 years or so. The name would not be said again because it brought too much sadness to people. So there's no glorification. I don't know why in the West there's this tremendous glorification of death.
Mm.
And the Mongols had absolutely none of that about them. No, it was to live because he had so few soldiers and he wanted to protect every single life at all costs. And he did. He did. He lost very few men compared to, I mean, other armies were, oh, we'll sacrifice 100,000 people. They did that. But with Genghis Khan, no, not even sacrifice one if you can avoid it.
Wow. That's an interesting one because I would imagine that other armies used this glorification of death as a means for, encouraging, like literally inducing courage in the hearts of their warriors. But it sounds like he again was doing something maybe a bit more practical in a way, less
Yes, yes,
patriotic or religiously zealous.
yes. But
Um,
what he did do was he made sure that every orphan and every widow was taken care of and that she and they received their share of every battle all the way through their life. He
okay.
ensured that everyone. So it's more important to take care of the living. And that also, I think, gave the men more confidence to do what they had to do, knowing that no matter what the outcome for them personally, their family was fine. It's not as
Uh,
though if I'm killed, my family is going to suffer by not having any more food or not having anyone to take care of them. No, he took care of women and orphans every time, every time.
that makes a lot of sense. So again, from a very practical standpoint, these men were incited to courage because they knew, well, ideally you live, but if you were to die and you didn't have the assurance that your wife and children would be taken care of, you would be more likely to flee, right? You'd be trying to
Yes,
survive.
yes, yes, yes,
Whereas if you know they're going to be taken care of, then you're probably going to exhibit greater courage
yes,
on the
yes.
battlefield.
I think of our own system, in the United States, oh, we have of course, we have a day to honor the dead. We have Memorial Day. We have special cemeteries. We have flags. We have
Mhm.
all kinds of things. The Mongols had none of that, none of that, none of that. But they took care of the family.
Mhm.
When you think about World War II and all the mothers, what did they get? They got a gold star
Mhm.
when their son died, a gold star mother.
Mhm.
And if you had two sons died, you're a double gold star mother. What is that? What is
Yeah.
that? That is just nothing. We pretend to be honoring these people, but they're dead. We don't honor the people who are alive to take care of them.
That's such a
Maybe
great
I
point.
maybe I have some kind of bias. My father was a soldier. He was a paratrooper in the war, and then he became a cook in the army. So it's just a soldier. So you grow up in that world with military camps. You have a different kind of feeling for some of these things like that. And maybe part of this is my own bias
Mm.
that just comes through. But
No,
he
sorry, go ahead.
he took care of the family. He took care of the family. I remember when my father was in Vietnam, and then and then I was trying to go to college. He went to Vietnam so that I could go to college because at that time they wouldn't send two men from one family to war unless they both volunteered to go. And so he said, I'm going to go, you go to college. So, but I knew if my father died, yeah, my mother could get some kind of pension, but that was going to end my college career. I knew that I would have to go to work and these kind of things hang over you, you know, this would not be a kind of consideration. Not that anybody in Genghis Khan's army was going to college or anything, but that would not be a consideration for them. The family would be taken care of always. And that's, I think for a soldier, that's probably the most important thing in the world,
Sure.
is to have the family taken care of. We don't seem to realize that. We think they're fighting for honor and glory, and if they're killed, we will respect them forever. But what they're worried about always is, mama back home, or their
Mm.
wife, or their children. That's a soldier's life.
Mm. Yeah, the strongest bond, as you said earlier, is kinship, and it's just practical. Once again, you're actually the what motivates you to go to fight to protect your homeland or your territory are the bonds you have with your kin, your next of kin. And
Yeah.
so to know that they are taken care of no matter the outcome is what's going to give you maximal courage. And I agree that whatever we're doing in the United States is ridiculous because, okay, you get the gold star, we have the veterans health care and pension and all these things, but I mean, you drive around any major US city and you see veterans, they're homeless, right? They're on the side of the street trying to get money and they just don't seem well taken care of from a my viewpoint.
And
Um,
my father ended up as garbage collector while he was dying from Agent Orange disease, and that's how he ended up. After fighting in 3 wars, he fought in World War II, in Korea, and also Vietnam, and then he ends up a garbage collector and suffering from Agent Orange disease, which killed him. He died from the Agent Orange disease. Yeah.
wow. What a what a kick in the teeth. I mean, and that's a disease from the weapon of war, right?
Yes, and the United States, of course, denied it, denied it, denied it. But
Yeah.
we were killing our own people in
Yeah.
Vietnam, killing our own people. And it wasn't collateral damage, it was just killing our own people.
It's despicable.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so I guess in some ways, I mean, Genghis Khan's was much more noble than even we are today, and at least taking care of the widows and the orphans.
I think so. And you have to think about it. We're discussing here all the warfare and the fighting. Yes, they were successful in all these different ways, without question. But at the same time, he had a nation of 1 million people. He had an army of 100,000 people. You do not conquer a nation of 100 million people with an army of 100,000 and rule them and keep them.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to be appealing to people somehow. And that was, his policies were as innovative as
Mm-hmm.
his own military experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where he was able to recognize, okay, one of the things he knew, that on the steppe, most of the fighting was about women, but that wasn't true in the civilized people. A lot of the fighting was about religion, of all things, So he knew how to attract the minority people in
Mm-hmm.
every situation. He knew how to get allegiance. He knew how to divide, even if they're all Muslims, he knew how to divide them according to their different sects and different beliefs. And so he attracted people like that. And his very first law, as I said, one of the first was the outlaw kidnapping of women. But the first law that he made for the whole nation, the whole empire outside of Mongolia, for everybody, was the law of religious freedom,
Mm-hmm.
because that attracted so many people. And what
Mm-hmm.
was innovative about his law of religious freedom is some other people had given religious freedom to different sects. It's like, okay, the Muslims and the Jews and the Christians can live, or maybe the Buddhists, or maybe these can't. But that's to priests, and that's to mullahs, and that's to monks and lamas. That's to people who run these organizations. Genghis Khan gave the right of freedom of religion to the people. He said every person has the right to choose, and nobody can prevent them from choosing. If you force anybody to change a religion, you will be killed. There's no record he ever killed anybody for that, but that's the law, the way he wrote it.
Mm-hmm.
If you prevent anybody from changing their religion, you will be killed. You choose your own religion. This was unique. This
Hmm.
idea that that right belongs to the person, not to the church, not to the monastery, not to the temple. It belongs to the person.
Mm.
And that this attracted a lot of people to him, a lot of people. The
Uh,
other thing was his raising the status of merchants. Merchants were so low, they were about as low down with prostitutes and soldiers and things like that. And he raised them. And in China, that was a great problem because he raised them above the learned people, the mandarins who had studied all their life and could do calligraphy and poetry and all these great arts. And he put a common merchant higher than that. And that's why people like Marco Polo came. People attracted from all over the world came into the Mongol Empire because especially merchants were attracted and religious minorities. So the policies of Genghis Khan in ruling were probably more important. You can conquer because you're very clever in war and because you're skilled. You don't rule a people for 100 years by conquering. That comes from something else. The people have to be benefiting in order to live under your system.
Yeah, I'm reminded here of, I think this was in your book. I'm paraphrasing and I hope I get it correctly, but like you can conquer a country by sword, but to conquer a nation, you must conquer their hearts, something like that, where people need to buy into the
Yes,
ideals and the
yes.
values. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, click here to find more just like it, and here to find our most recent episode. Also, make sure to like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money, and be sure to subscribe to this channel to stay connected.